Have you ever finished a Harry Potter book and started mentally listing everyone you wanted to hit with a bludger? You're not alone. Today, we're counting down the 10 most hated characters in the wizarding world, and why fans still haven't forgiven them. Here's the thing about hating a Harry Potter character. It's not the same as hating a bad person in real life. Some of these 10 are hated because they're genuinely evil. Others are hated because they're just pathetic. And a few make this list simply because they're written so well that you feel something every single time they show up on the page, which honestly says more about Rowling's skill than it does about them. So we're going from merely irritating all the way up to the character so universally despised that saying their name out loud practically requires a shudder. Number 10, Gilderoy Lockhart. On paper, Lockhart shouldn't crack a top 10 hated list at all. He's more punchline than villain, right? Blinding smile, a wardrobe full of matching robes, an ego roughly the size of the Great Hall. But strip away the comedy, and what's left underneath is actual fraud. Lockhart built his entire career by hunting down witches and wizards who'd done something genuinely heroic, hitting them with a memory charm, and stealing their story for himself. Every book on his shelf, every award on his wall, every fan letter piling up in his office, all of it rests on erased memories and stolen glory. That's not vanity. That's theft dressed up in a photogenic smile. And it's worth sitting with how brazen the scheme actually was. This wasn't a guy exaggerating stories at parties. He built an entire publishing empire on it. Books, awards, a teaching position at Hogwarts itself, while the actual heroes wandered around somewhere with gaping holes in their memory, never even knowing what he'd taken. Picture a journalist tracking down real war heroes, wiping their memory, and publishing their stories under his own byline as a best-selling memoir. That's basically Lockhart's whole career. None of that stops him from being funny, though. And that's exactly why he only lands at number 10. His incompetence practically radiates off the page. You never once believed this man could hex his way out of a paper bag, and watching him get exposed, spell after failed spell, is genuinely satisfying. So what does the wizarding world's most famous fraud deserve? Poetic justice, apparently. When his own bungled memory charm backfires during the Chamber of Secrets, Lockhart loses his memory for good, the exact fate he inflicted on so many others. Karma, wizard style. He built a career on other people's stolen memories and lost his own doing it. But that's only the warm-up. Number 9 gets a lot less funny fast. Lucius Malfoy. If Lockhart is fraud with a smile, Lucius Malfoy is something far more familiar. Wealth used as an actual weapon. His arrogance is impossible to miss from the moment he walks onto the page, and he's got the Gringotts vault to back up every bit of it. Need proof? He once bought the entire Slytherin Quidditch team brand new Nimbus 2001 brooms, not because the team needed better gear, but purely so his son Draco could lock down a spot on it. Imagine a parent buying an entire varsity team new equipment just so their kid makes the roster. That's Lucius in one sentence. Money standing in for merit. It doesn't stop at Quidditch either. Lucius quietly worked his influence deep into the Ministry of Magic, and according to the story, hefty donations bought him standing that other witches and wizards had to actually earn. Wealth substituted for reputation, which is basically lobbying with a wand. Money can only carry a person so far, though, and this is where the cracks start showing. The moment real danger arrives, the moment Voldemort himself starts making demands, Lucius folds almost instantly, terrified of the very dark power he once served so proudly. And during the Battle of Hogwarts, with the stakes as high as they'll ever get, he chooses to run rather than fight. So why only number 9 on a list of hated characters? Because when it actually mattered, Lucius Malfoy ended up on the right side of history, even if it took the total collapse of everything he valued to push him there. Not redemption, exactly, but enough to keep him out of the top half of this list. Still, he eventually did the bare minimum is a pretty low bar, and Lucius clears it just barely. Now here's where the list gets a little more personal, and honestly, a little more controversial. Number 8, James Potter. Yes, that James Potter. Harry's father. The golden boy of Gryffindor. Lily's beloved husband. The man who died protecting his family. So why does he show up on a hated characters list at all? Here's the uncomfortable part the films tend to gloss over. Young James Potter was, by his own son's account, and by what we see directly in Snape's memories, kind of a bully. He and his friends made a habit of tormenting young Severus Snape, apparently for the entertainment value of it, while James cultivated a bad boy reputation around the halls of Hogwarts. Uncomfortable, isn't it? We spend the whole series building him into a noble, tragic hero, and then Order of the Phoenix drops a flashback that makes him look less like a hero and more like the guy you'd cross the hallway to avoid. To be fair, This entire entry is about as subjective as the list gets. People change, and James clearly matured by the time he fell for Lily and started a family. So, plenty of fans will argue adolescent cruelty shouldn't define a person forever. Well, fair point. But here's the counter, and it's what keeps James on this list. Knowing he changed doesn't erase what we watched him do to a defenseless kid in that memory. Regret means something. It just doesn't automatically mean forgiveness. James Potter sits at number 8, not as a villain, but as proof that even beloved heroes can have chapters you'd rather skip. That one's controversial, sure, but it's nothing next to someone whose entire job is generating headlines. Number 7, Rita Skeeter. Picture the description before the reveal. Bleached blonde curls, oversized glasses, a nose for scandal, and here's the twist, a secret, unregistered animagus who can turn into a beetle whenever she wants. That beetle buzzing around, eavesdropping on private conversations throughout Goblet of Fire, that's her. That's how she gets every invasive quote for the Daily Prophet. We meet Rita Skeeter during the Triwizard Tournament, where she makes it her personal mission to torment the young champions with reporting that's exaggerated at best and fabricated at worst. It's honestly wild to picture. A journalist literally shapeshifting into an insect to spy on teenagers for a tabloid scoop. Muggles have paparazzi with zoom lenses. The wizarding world has a witch who turns into a bug and lands on your shoulder. Rita's journalism isn't just irritating either. It's actively harmful. Her stories chase drama over accuracy. And more than once, that costs the people she covers real emotional and social fallout. It takes Hermione Granger, unsurprisingly, to finally outmaneuver her, exposing the illegal animagus status and using it as leverage to keep her quiet for a while. Old habits die hard, though. Even years later, after Dumbledore's death, her final piece on him is described as anything but objective. One more slanted story, built to sell papers instead of tell the truth. So why number 7 and not higher? Because for all her venom, Rita never wields real dark magic or physical danger. Her weapon is the pen, or in her case, the quick quotes quill. Different kind of harm. Still real. Alright, buckle in, because we're entering Dursley territory now, and things get personal in a whole new way. Number 6, Dudley Dursley. Dudley's introduction tells you almost everything you need to know immediately. A spoiled, tantrum-prone kid, handed every toy and every privilege and exactly 0 boundaries. That lack of boundaries doesn't stay confined to birthday parties either. For years, Dudley makes a habit of bullying Harry, physically and emotionally, inside a house where Harry has literally nowhere else to go. That detail matters more than it looks. This isn't 2 kids fighting at school who get to go home to separate houses afterward. Harry lived under that roof every single day with no escape route. Put Dudley's cruelty in that context, and it stops looking like sibling rivalry and starts looking like something considerably darker. But people can grow, and that's exactly the turn that keeps Dudley from climbing any higher on this list. As he gets older, something in him genuinely starts to shift. By the 5th book, after a terrifying run-in with actual Dementors, Dudley experiences something that looks a lot like real fear and real reflection for the first time in his life. And by the time the Potters and Dursleys go their separate ways for good, Dudley does something nobody saw coming from the boy who once chased Harry around the neighborhood with a gang of friends. He apologizes. Genuinely. Small moment in the grand scheme of the series, but it recolors everything before it. Was the change mostly fear rather than moral growth? Maybe. But more than several other characters on this list will ever manage. Which brings us to the man who raised him. Number 5, Vernon Dursley. If Dudley is the process of bad parenting, Vernon is the source. He's the walking embodiment of everything unpleasant about the Dursley household. The willful ignorance, the casual cruelty, the suffocating obsession with looking normal no matter the cost. Here's a detail that might surprise you, though. Petunia Dursley, Vernon's wife, doesn't actually appear on this list at all. She'd land somewhere around 11 or 12 if we kept counting. Close, but not quite hated enough to make the cut. So why does Vernon rank so much higher than his own wife? Motivation is the answer. Petunia's resentment toward magic, and toward Harry by extension, is at least rooted in something recognizably human. Jealousy toward her sister Lily. Insecurity about being the ordinary one in a magical family. Years of feeling second best. Not an excuse, but an explanation. Vernon doesn't get that excuse. His unpleasantness seems to come from nowhere deeper than his own nature. A man who simply seems built to be difficult and never once appears to question it. And here's the detail that seals it. Even Petunia softens by the end. She has a real moment with Harry before they part. Speaking about Lily with actual feeling. Even reaching out her hand in farewell. Vernon gets no such moment. No softening, no goodbye, no flicker of self-awareness. He exits the story exactly as unpleasant as he entered it. Now we're into the top 4, and this is where the list stops being about arrogance and starts being about actual betrayal. Number 4, Mundungus Fletcher. Here's a phrase for you. The second biggest coward in the entire Harry Potter saga. That's Mundungus Fletcher's role in this story, and he earns the title in the most damning way possible. During the Battle of the Seven Potters, the operation to smuggle Harry safely out of Privet Drive using decoys, Mundungus abandons the mission mid-flight. Not retreats, abandons it, mid-panic, leaving his fellow Order members exposed. And the consequences aren't abstract either. His flight directly costs Mad-Eye Moody his life. To be fair to him for 1 second, it's suggested Moody had practically dragged him into joining the mission in the first place. But that context doesn't make the betrayal better. If anything, it makes it worse. Knowing the danger, being pressured into fighting, and still choosing to bolt the second things got dangerous, with a friend's life on the line, that's not an excuse. That's cowardice with extra steps. And his sins don't stop there. This is a man who steals valuables straight out of the Black family home at various points and quietly sells them off for profit, showing exactly zero guilt about betraying the people who trusted him enough to let him inside in the first place. For a franchise that leans so hard on loyalty, Gryffindor's whole house identity is basically built around it, Mundungus represents its complete collapse. He's not evil in some grand sweeping sense. He's just fundamentally unreliable. The kind of guy who leaves you behind the moment things get dangerous. And somehow, that's almost more infuriating than outright villainy. We're in the top 3 now, and this gets personal in the most literal sense. Number 3, a character most casual fans might not even remember by name, but anyone who's read or watched Prisoner of Azkaban remembers exactly how she made them feel. Aunt Marge. Vernon's sister, proud bulldog breeder, and by her own introduction in the story, a woman who takes visible, active pleasure in making Harry's life miserable every time she visits. Here's the detail that catapults her straight into the top 3, though. Marge doesn't just ignore Harry the way the rest of the Dursleys sometimes manage to. She actively targets him. She insults his dead parents to his face, speculating gleefully about what kind of bad blood must have produced a kid like him. And then there's the line. The one moment that turns simmering dislike into genuine hatred for a huge chunk of the fandom. She says, essentially, that if Harry had been left on her doorstep instead of the Dursleys, she would have shipped him straight off to an orphanage rather than take him in. Let that sink in. This is a woman talking about a grieving, orphaned child, saying out loud that she'd have discarded him entirely rather than offer him the barest minimum of family obligation. Genuinely one of the coldest lines in the whole series, delivered so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it somehow makes it worse. A Muggle relative might at least fake politeness at a family gathering. Marge doesn't even bother with the performance. She just says the quiet part loud, on repeat, until Harry's accidental magic literally inflates her like a balloon and sends her floating off over the neighborhood. Fans have been cheering that scene for over 2 decades. Fully deserved. And now the final stretch. This is where the list stops being about unlikable relatives and cruel journalists and starts being about actions with real, permanent, tragic weight. Number 2, Peter Pettigrew, better known to most of the wizarding world as Wormtail. If there's one word for Peter Pettigrew's entire legacy, it's betrayal. And worm turns out to be an eerily accurate description, since his animagus form is literally a rat. He was famously best friends with James Potter, trusted enough to be named secret keeper for the Potter family's location during the height of the war against Voldemort. And what did he do with that trust? He handed James and Lily's location directly to Voldemort. The result? One close friend murdered, another framed and imprisoned for over a decade for a crime Peter committed himself. It doesn't stop there. To fake his own death and cover his tracks, Pettigrew cuts off one of his own fingers, leaves it behind as false evidence, and transforms into his rat form to vanish into hiding. Specifically, hiding in plain sight as a beloved pet, living for years inside the Weasley household under an assumed identity. Sit with the audacity of that for a second. A man fakes his own death by mutilating himself, then spends over a decade sleeping in a young boy's bedroom, completely unnoticed, while an innocent man rots in Azkaban for his crime. How do you live with that? How do you sit at someone's dinner table for years knowing exactly what you did and exactly what it cost? Here's where it gets genuinely complicated, and this is worth sitting with rather than rushing past. Pettigrew's actions don't seem to come from pure malice or ideological devotion to Voldemort. They come from something far more mundane and, in its own way, more pathetic. Fear. Overwhelming, paralyzing cowardice that pushed him to betray the people who trusted him most rather than face the consequences of standing against a dark wizard. That doesn't excuse it, not even close, but it does complicate the picture. He's not a mastermind, not driven by hatred or ambition, just catastrophically weak, and that weakness gets people killed. Even his one flicker of redemption near the very end doesn't undo the decade plus of damage that came before it. If you genuinely feel sympathy for Pettigrew, tell us why in the comments, because plenty of longtime fans have tried to make that case, and it's still one of the most debated characters in the whole series. But by pure weight of consequence, a murdered friend, a wrongly imprisoned one, over a decade stolen from an innocent man's life, Peter Pettigrew earns number 2 fair and square. Which brings us finally to number 1. If you've watched even a handful of Harry Potter videos before this one, you probably already know exactly who's about to show up. There's never really any competition for this spot. Number 1, the single most hated character in the entire Harry Potter franchise, Dolores Umbridge. Where do you even start with her? The pink cardigans, the kitten plates on the wall, that sickly sweet sing-song voice that somehow makes everything she says sound 10 times more menacing than if she'd just shouted it instead. She's the walking embodiment of a very specific and very real kind of horror, the smiling bureaucrat who wields institutional power like a weapon while insisting, with total sincerity, that she's only doing what's best for everyone. Voldemort is evil as raw, overwhelming force. Umbridge is evil as paperwork, evil as policy, evil with a pleasant smile stapled on top. It's not just her personality that earns the top spot either. It's what she actually does with it. Underneath that toad-like saccharine exterior, Umbridge engages in practices that are, by the story's own account, genuinely dangerous and, in more than one instance, outright criminal. And as if the cruelty weren't enough on its own, she's also shown to be fundamentally incompetent as an educator, more obsessed with control and compliance than with teaching her students anything useful. A genuinely dangerous combination when those students are about to walk straight into a war. And here's what really locks her into number 1, instead of tying with someone like Pettigrew. Scale. Pettigrew's betrayal, devastating as it was, stayed personal. It wrecked the lives of people close to him. Umbridge operates on a completely different level. She's not betraying a handful of friends. She's using an entire institution, an entire government position, to inflict harm on however many students happen to pass through her classroom, or however many people happen to fall under her jurisdiction. That's the difference between a knife in the back and a policy signed in triplicate. One's intimate, the other's systemic, impersonal, and honestly, more chilling, because it comes wrapped in the language of order and propriety instead of obvious malice. You almost don't see it coming until it's already reshaped the world around you. So here's where that leaves us. 10 characters, 10 very different reasons to despise them, from a fraud who stole other people's memories, all the way up to a woman whose smile might be the scariest thing in the entire series. What ties them together isn't dark magic or grand villainy, it's the very human, very recognizable flaws hiding underneath the wands and the robes. Vanity, cowardice, cruelty, and the quiet, corrosive damage done by people who abuse whatever power they're handed. These aren't monsters from some distant fantasy realm. They're the bullies, the frauds, and the bureaucrats we've all met somewhere in the real world, too. And if hating these 10 felt this satisfying, wait until you see the entire family trees of all these characters. That's waiting for you in this video.